Margaret Holbrook thought she owned the entire neighborhood until she discovered that some battles have consequences she never saw coming. When she declared war over a simple fence, she had no idea that her own carefully constructed world was built on lies that would come crashing down in the most devastating way possible. Sometimes the person you're trying to destroy is the only one who can save you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Ridge Drive as David Chen stepped onto his back deck, coffee mug in hand. 6 months of saving every penny had finally paid off. His dream pool sparkled like a sapphire jewel in his backyard, complete with a small waterfall feature and heated spa. At 34, the software engineer had worked overtime for 2 years to afford this luxury, and watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma's face light up when she first saw it had made every sacrifice worthwhile. "Daddy, can we swim before school?" Emma bounced on her toes, already in her favorite purple swimsuit despite the early hour. "Maybe after, sweetheart. We don't want to be late on your first day at the new school." David ruffled her dark hair, still marveling at how perfectly their new life was falling into place. The divorce had been messy, but this fresh start in the suburbs felt like exactly what they both needed. The sound of a gate slamming shut shattered the peaceful morning. David turned to see a woman in her mid-50s marching across his lawn with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to getting her way. Margaret Holbrook, he'd met her briefly during the house tour, was immaculately dressed in a cream-colored blazer and pearls, her silver hair styled in a perfect bob that probably cost more than David's monthly grocery budget. "Mr. Chen." Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone who'd spent decades chairing PDA meetings and homeowners association boards. "We need to talk." Emma instinctively moved closer to her father, sensing the tension radiating from their unexpected visitor. "Good morning, Mrs. Holbrook. What can I do for you?" Margaret's pale blue eyes swept over the pool area with unmistakable disapproval. "This?" She gestured broadly with one manicured hand. "This entire setup is completely inappropriate for a family neighborhood." David felt his jaw tighten. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what you mean. Everything was permitted and inspected according to city codes." "Oh, I'm sure you dotted all your I's and crossed your T's." Margaret's smile was sharp as broken glass. "But what you clearly didn't consider is the impact on the neighborhood children. Do you have any idea how many kids live on this street? They are going to see this pool and assume it's some sort of community center." "Hey, what?" David set his coffee mug down on the deck railing, struggling to process the absurdity of the complaint. "Mrs. Holbrook, it's in my fenced backyard. On my property. A fence that any determined child could easily climb." Margaret stepped closer, her voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow student. "What happens when little Timmy from down the street decides to take a swim while you're at work? What happens when someone gets hurt?" Emma tugged on David's pajama pants. "Daddy, I don't like her." Margaret's expression softened marginally as she looked down at Emma, but her words remained razor-sharp. "I'm sure you're a lovely little girl, dear, but your father needs to understand that his choices affect everyone. We've worked very hard to maintain the character of this neighborhood." "The character?" David's voice rose slightly. "It's a swimming pool, not a casino. It's a liability and a nuisance." Margaret straightened to her full height, which was impressive despite her small frame. "And frankly, it's an eyesore. The previous owners had such a lovely herb garden where that monstrosity now sits." Heat flooded David's cheeks. "Monstrosity? Lady, I spent $40,000 on that monstrosity. It's one of the nicest pools in the city. Money doesn't buy taste, Mr. Chen." The words hit like a slap. "Or consideration for others." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, why is she being mean about our pool?" The sight of his daughter's distress snapped something inside David. "Mrs. Holbrook, I think this conversation is over. The pool stays. If you have legal concerns, feel free to take them up with the city." Margaret's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I see. Well, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. People like you always think you can just move into established neighborhoods and change everything to suit yourselves. The racist undertone wasn't subtle, and David felt his hands clench into fists. People like me. New money. No appreciation for tradition or community standards. Margaret's recovery was smooth, but the damage was done. I was hoping we could resolve this like civilized neighbors, but I can see you're not interested in compromise. What compromise? You want me to fill in my pool because it might attract children? I want you to consider building a proper privacy fence. Something substantial. 8 feet minimum, no gaps. Margaret pulled out her phone and made a show of scrolling through what appeared to be legal documents. Actually, according to the neighborhood covenant, any structure that significantly alters the aesthetic character of the community requires approval from the homeowners association. David felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. There's no homeowners association listed in my purchase documents. Margaret's smile was triumphant. Oh, but there is. The Maple Ridge Neighborhood Preservation Society. I'm the president, and we've been operating under a grandfather clause since 1987. Your realtor obviously didn't do their due diligence. The coffee mug slipped from David's suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the deck planks. That's impossible. My lawyer reviewed everything. Lawyers miss things. It happens. Margaret was clearly enjoying his shock. The good news is that we are reasonable people. Build an appropriate fence at your expense, naturally, and we can probably work something out. And if you refuse? Margaret's expression grew deadly serious. Then we'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. The covenant includes provisions for removing non-compliant structures. At the owner's expense, of course. Emma began to cry in earnest now, and David scooped her up, feeling her small body tremble against his chest. You're scaring my daughter. I'm simply explaining reality. Margaret slipped her phone back into her purse with practiced efficiency. The fence needs to be up within 30 days, or we file for an injunction. Those are your options. As she turned to leave, Margaret paused, looking back over her shoulder with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, and Mr. Chen. Welcome to the neighborhood. David watched her walk away, his mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. $30,000 for an 8-foot privacy fence, minimum. Money he didn't have after draining his savings for the pool. Money that would mean no family vacation, no new school clothes for Emma, no breathing room in a budget already stretched to the breaking point. Daddy. Emma's voice was small and scared. Do we have to get rid of our pool? David looked down at his daughter's tear-streaked face, then back at the pool that represented so much more than just a place to swim. It was proof that he could provide for his family, that the divorce hadn't broken him, that their new life could be better than the old one. No, sweetheart, he said quietly, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. We don't. But as Margaret Holbrook disappeared around the corner of his house, David Chen had no idea that his refusal to back down had just set in motion a chain of events that would expose secrets Margaret had spent decades hiding, secrets that would ultimately destroy the very neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. The war for Maple Ridge Drive had begun, and neither side could imagine how it would. 3 days after Margaret's ultimatum, David sat in the cramped office of Rebecca Torres, the only attorney in town who specialized in property law and didn't charge consultation fees that would bankrupt him. The walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, but what caught David's attention was the stack of documents Rebecca had spread across her desk like tarot cards predicting doom. I've got good news and bad news, Rebecca said, pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose. At 42, she had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many David versus Goliath cases that didn't end well for David. Which do you want first? Emma sat quietly in the corner, coloring in a book Rebecca had given her, but David could see her ears perked up, listening to every word. Bad news first. Always. The Maple Ridge Neighborhood Preservation Society is real. Margaret Holbrook filed the paperwork in 1987, and it's been renewed every 5 years since then. Technically, they do have authority over certain aesthetic modifications to properties within the designated boundaries. David's stomach dropped. And the good news? Rebecca's expression shifted, and for the first time since he'd walked into her office, she looked genuinely intrigued. The good news is that Margaret Holbrook may have made a very expensive mistake. She pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it to reveal what looked like architectural blueprints. I did some digging into the property records and something doesn't add up. According to the original covenant documents, the Preservation Society's authority is limited to structures visible from the street or adjacent properties. My pool isn't visible from the street. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Rebecca spread out a surveyor's map from 1985. Look at this original property line survey, then compare it to this one from 2019. David leaned forward, studying the documents. To his untrained eye, they looked identical. I don't see the difference. The fence line moved about 3 feet on the eastern border. Rebecca traced her finger along the property lines. Margaret Holbrook's backyard is 3 feet bigger than it should be, which means she's been trespassing on the previous owner's property for decades. More than that, she's been paying property taxes on land she doesn't legally own, which in some jurisdictions can lead to adverse possession claims. But in this case, there's documented proof that she knew the correct boundary line. Rebecca pulled out another document. The original survey was filed with the county in 1985, the same year she moved in. David felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. So what does this mean? It means Margaret Holbrook has been stealing land for 40 years. And if she's been using her illegally expanded property to justify her standing in the Preservation Society. Rebecca's smile was predatory. Well, let's just say her authority to demand anything from you might be built on very shaky legal ground. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Does that mean the mean lady can't make us get rid of our pool? Rebecca's expression softened as she addressed the 8-year-old. It means your daddy might have more options than we thought, sweetheart. But before David could ask about next steps, Rebecca's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Her face paled as she read it. What is it? David asked. Margaret Holbrook just filed for an emergency injunction. She's asking a judge to order the immediate removal of your pool, claiming it's an imminent threat to neighborhood children. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? How is that even possible? She's got connections. Her late husband was Judge Holbrook, served on the county bench for 25 years before he died. Half the current judicial staff probably owe their careers to recommendations he made. Rebecca was already reaching for her coat. But she just made her second mistake. What's the first? Stealing your neighbor's land. The second is rushing to court before we're ready for her. Rebecca's smile was grim but determined. Emergency injunctions require proof of immediate danger. But if we can prove she doesn't have standing to file the complaint in the first place. David felt a mix of terror and excitement. What do you need from me? Everything. Every document. Every photo, every receipt related to your pool installation. And I need you to do something that might feel uncomfortable. Anything. Rebecca hesitated, glancing at Emma. I need you to start documenting every interaction with Margaret Holbrook. Every conversation, every threat, every time she sets foot on your property. And David. Yeah. Be very careful. People who've been getting away with fraud for 40 years don't usually back down quietly when someone threatens to expose them. As they left Rebecca's office, David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emergency neighborhood meeting tonight 7 p.m. at Holbrook residence. Pool situation requires immediate community action. Attendance mandatory. She's rallying. The troops, David muttered, showing the message to Rebecca. Good. Let her. Rebecca's confidence was infectious. Every move she makes now is evidence we can use tomorrow. Just remember, document everything, stay calm, and whatever you do, don't let her provoke you into doing something stupid. That evening, David stood on Margaret's perfectly manicured front lawn, watching neighbors file into her house like soldiers reporting for duty. He recognized most of them from brief encounters during his morning runs, the Johnsons from 2 houses Down, elderly Mr. Petrov from across the street, the young couple with twin toddlers who lived next to Margaret. Emma had wanted to come, but David had left her with Mrs. Kim, the friendly grandmother who lived behind them and who, notably, had not received an invitation to Margaret's emergency meeting. David. Margaret appeared in her doorway, dressed in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. How good of you to join us. I wasn't sure you'd come. Wouldn't miss it. David forced a smile. Always interested in community input. Margaret's return smile was razor-sharp. Wonderful. Do come in. The Holbrook house was a shrine to old money and older grudges. Every surface displayed evidence of Margaret's prominence in local society, photos with former mayors, plaques from charity organizations, and prominently positioned on the mantelpiece, a framed picture of the late Judge Holbrook shaking hands with a former governor. About 15 neighbors had gathered in the spacious living room, perched on antique furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. David recognized the setup immediately. Margaret had positioned herself in front of the fireplace like a professor addressing a classroom, while everyone else sat in carefully arranged chairs that forced them to look up at her. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Margaret began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. As most of you know, we are facing an unprecedented situation that threatens the very character of our beloved neighborhood. Mrs. Johnson, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and graying hair, raised her hand tentatively. Margaret, I have to say, I don't really understand what the problem is. David's pool is lovely and it's not bothering anyone. That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to neighborhood decline, Helen. Margaret's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Today it's an inappropriate pool. Tomorrow it's multiple families cramming into single-family homes. Next week it's commercial vehicles parked on the street. David felt his jaw clench. The racist dog whistle wasn't subtle. Mr. Petrov, a Russian immigrant who'd lived on the street for 30 years, spoke up in his heavily accented English. I think pool is beautiful. My grandchildren love to see the lights at night. Victor, I appreciate your perspective, Margaret said with the kind of condescending patience usually reserved for small children, but you have to understand that property values are at stake here. One inappropriate modification can bring down values for everyone. What makes it inappropriate? The question came from Jake Morrison, one half of the young couple with twins. I mean, it's professionally installed, it's not visible from the street, and it's not causing any noise or safety issues. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. The covenant clearly states. What covenant? Jake pressed. I've lived here for 3 years and I've never heard of any neighborhood association. The Maple Ridge Neighborhood Preservation Society has protected this community's interests since 1987, Margaret snapped. Just because you weren't properly informed by your realtor doesn't mean it doesn't exist. David saw his opening. Margaret, can you show us the boundaries of this Preservation Society's authority? I'd love to see exactly which properties fall under the covenant. For just a moment, Margaret's mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. The boundaries are clearly established in the original filing, which you've never shown to anyone, Jake interrupted. I'm starting to think this whole thing is bullsh. Language, please. Margaret's voice had gone arctic. There are community standards to maintain. Community standards like telling people they can't use their own property. Mrs. Johnson's voice was sharper now. Margaret, I've known you for 15 years and this isn't like you. But David was watching Margaret's face and he realized with sudden clarity that this was exactly like her. This was who she'd always been. He was just the first person who'd ever refused to back. The county courthouse smelled like old coffee and broken dreams. David sat in the gallery behind Rebecca Torres, watching her arrange documents with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Across the aisle, Margaret Holbrook commanded a small army of legal representation, 3 attorneys in expensive suits who probably charged more per hour than David made in a week. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Reeves. Judge Reeves was a stern woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the book. David's heart sank when he noticed Margaret nod respectfully at the judge, another connection in her web of influence. Be seated. We are here for the emergency injunction filed by the Maple Ridge Neighborhood Preservation Society versus Chen. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may proceed. Margaret's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Charles Whitman, rose with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case he expected to win. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of covenant enforcement. The defendant has willfully violated established neighborhood standards by installing an inappropriate structure without proper authorization. David watched Margaret sitting ramrod straight in the front row, her face a mask of righteous indignation. She dressed for the part, conservative navy suit, minimal jewelry except for her late husband's wedding ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck like a talisman of judicial authority. The pool in question, Whitman continued, poses an attractive nuisance to neighborhood children and represents a clear violation of the aesthetic standards that have protected property values in Maple Ridge for nearly 4 decades. Rebecca scribbled notes, but David could see the tension in her shoulders. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Reeves reviewed the paperwork with practiced efficiency. Mr. Whitman, I see your client is seeking immediate removal of the structure. That's an extreme remedy. What evidence do you have of imminent danger? Your Honor, just yesterday we documented 3 separate instances of neighborhood children attempting to access the defendant's property to use the pool without permission. David felt his blood run cold. That was a complete lie. Rebecca shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. We haven't seen any such documentation. Sustained. Mr. Whitman, if you have evidence, please present it properly. Whitman's confidence wavered slightly. Of course, Your Honor. We'll have those photographs submitted immediately. He whispered something urgent to one of his associates, who began frantically shuffling through papers. Judge Reeves turned to Rebecca. Counsel for the defendant, I assume you have a response to these allegations? Yes, Your Honor, and it's going to completely change how this court views this case. Rebecca's voice carried a quiet confidence that made Margaret shift uncomfortably in her seat. We move for immediate dismissal of this complaint on the grounds that the plaintiff lacks standing to bring this action. Whitman looked genuinely confused. Your Honor, Mrs. Holbrook is the president of the Neighborhood Preservation Society. Her standing is unquestionable. Actually, it's very questionable. Rebecca pulled out a thick folder and approached the bench. Your Honor, we've discovered that Mrs. Holbrook has been operating under false pretenses for decades. Margaret's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. This is ridiculous character assassination, Your Honor. Judge Reeves held up a hand for silence. Ms. Torres, I'll hear your argument, but it better be substantial. Rebecca returned to her table and pulled out the surveyor's map she'd shown David. Your Honor, the Maple Ridge Neighborhood Preservation Society's authority is derived from a covenant that applies only to properties within specific boundaries. However, our investigation has revealed that Mrs. Holbrook's own property extends 3 feet beyond her legal property line onto land that belongs to the adjacent property owner. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Margaret's attorneys huddled in urgent conference. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, Mrs. Holbrook has been paying property taxes on this stolen land for 40 years, which suggests she was fully aware of the illegal encroachment. Judge Reeves leaned forward. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Torres. Do you have proof? We do. Rebecca handed a stack of documents to the bailiff. These are the original survey records from 1985, the year Mrs. Holbrook moved to Maple Ridge Drive. They clearly show the correct property boundaries. These are the current survey records showing where her fence line actually sits. And these are 40 years of property tax records showing she's been claiming ownership of land that legally belongs to my client's neighbor. Margaret stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant to the matter at hand. Sit down, Mrs. Holbrook. Judge Reeves' voice cut like a whip. Ms. Torres, how does this relate to the injunction request? Your Honor, if Mrs. Holbrook doesn't legally own the property she claims to own, then her standing as president of a preservation society with geographical restrictions becomes questionable. More importantly, the illegal property expansion suggests a pattern of disregard for property law that undermines her credibility in bringing complaints against other property owners. David watched Margaret's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Her lead attorney was frantically whispering in her ear, but she kept shaking her head, her jaw set in stubborn defiance. Judge Reeves studied the documents for several long minutes. The courtroom was silent except for the tick of the wall clock and Margaret's audible breathing. "Mr. Whitman, how do you respond to these allegations?" Whitman stood slowly, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. "Your Honor, these are clearly diversionary tactics designed to no." Judge Reeves' voice was ice cold. "These are property records filed with this county. Are you suggesting they are fraudulent?" "Of course not, Your Honor, but, Ms. Torres, you mentioned a pattern of disregard for property law. Do you have additional evidence?" Rebecca's smile was predatory. "We do, Your Honor." She pulled out another folder. "Over the past 15 years, Mrs. Holbrook has filed 17 complaints with various city departments against neighbors who've made property modifications. Swimming pools, sheds, garden expansions, even fence repairs. In every case, the complaints were ultimately dismissed, but not before the property owners spent thousands of dollars on legal fees and compliance modifications." Margaret's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Those were legitimate concerns about neighborhood standards, Mrs. Holbrook. You will remain silent or be held in contempt." Judge Reeves turned back to Rebecca. "Continue." "Your Honor, we believe this represents a systematic campaign of harassment designed to maintain Mrs. Holbrook's self-appointed authority over her neighbors. The current complaint against my client follows the exact same pattern, baseless allegations of safety concerns and aesthetic violations designed to force compliance through legal intimidation." David watched Margaret's attorneys abandon ship in real time. Whitman was gathering his papers, his associates were already backing toward the exit, and Margaret sat alone in the front row looking like a general watching her army desert on the battlefield. Judge Reeves set the documents aside and fixed Margaret with a stare that could have melted steel. "Mrs. Holbrook, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I strongly advise you to answer truthfully. Are you aware that your property fence extends beyond your legal property line?" Margaret stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly. For 40 years, she'd wielded her late husband's judicial connections like a weapon, and now she was facing a judge who clearly wasn't impressed by her pedigree. "Your Honor, the fence has been in that location since before I moved to the property. That's not what I asked. Are you aware that the fence extends beyond your legal property line?" The silence stretched for an eternity. David could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everyone in the courtroom holding their breath. "Yes," Margaret whispered. "And have you been paying property taxes on land you don't legally own?" Another devastating pause. "Yes." Judge Reeves nodded grimly. "Ms. Torres, I'm dismissing the injunction request with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential property fraud." Margaret collapsed back into her seat as if she'd been shot. "Mrs. Holbrook, you're also ordered to restore the correct property boundaries within 30 days and to compensate the affected property owner for 40 years of lost land use. Failure to comply will result in additional criminal charges." The gavel came down like a gunshot. As the courtroom entered, David felt a mix of relief and shock. They'd won, but watching Margaret's complete destruction felt almost too brutal to celebrate. Rebecca packed her papers with satisfaction. "That," she said quietly, "is what happens when someone gets too comfortable breaking the rules." But as they left the courthouse, David noticed Margaret standing alone on the courthouse steps, her expensive attorneys long gone, her face a mask of devastating loss. For just a moment, he felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman who tried to destroy his family. That sympathy died when he checked his phone and found 17 missed calls from Mrs. Kim. "David." Mrs. Kim's voice was panicked when he called back. "You need to come home right now. Someone broke." David's house looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Every window on the ground floor was shattered, the front door hung askew on its hinges, and furniture was scattered across the lawn like debris from an explosion. The pool, his beautiful, hard-earned pool, was filled with concrete mix that was already beginning to harden in the afternoon sun. "Oh my God." David stood frozen on his driveway, trying to process the devastation. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built for. Emma lay in ruins. "Daddy!" Emma burst out of Mrs. Kim's house and ran toward him, tears streaming down her face. "Someone hurt our house." David caught her in his arms, holding her tight while his mind reeled with the implications. This wasn't random vandalism, this was personal, targeted, and expensive. Someone had brought concrete trucks, power tools, and enough rage to destroy everything that mattered to him. Mrs. Kim approached cautiously, her elderly face creased with worry. "The police already came. They said it happened sometime between noon and 2 o'clock. Professional job, they knew exactly what they were doing." "Did anyone see anything?" Mr. Petrov thinks he saw a landscaping truck, but he didn't think anything of it until the police asked. Mrs. Kim glanced at Emma, then lowered her voice. "David, whoever did this, they knew your house would be empty. They knew you'd be in court." The implication hit him like a physical blow. Only a handful of people had known about the court hearing, and only one of them had motive for this level of destruction. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have taken the deal. Now you have nothing. How does it feel to lose everything you care about?" David screenshot the message and immediately called Rebecca, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely dial. "Jesus Christ," Rebecca breathed when he described the scene. "David, this is escalation beyond anything I've seen in property disputes. We need to call the police back and show them that text." "I already called them. They are treating it as a B&E, but..." David looked at his destroyed home, at Emma clinging to his leg, at the concrete slowly hardening in his pool. "Rebecca, my insurance doesn't cover malicious destruction. Even if they catch whoever did this, I can't afford to rebuild. Don't make any decisions yet. I'm coming over." While they waited for Rebecca, David walked through his destroyed house with a detective named Sarah Martinez, documenting the damage. The intruders had been systematic, every piece of electronics smashed, every photo torn from its frame, every piece of furniture overturned. They'd even destroyed Emma's toys, her books, her drawings from school. "This is personal, detective," Martinez said, photographing the wreckage. "Someone wanted to hurt you specifically, not just rob you." "I know who did it." Martinez looked up sharply. "You have evidence?" David showed her the text message. "Margaret Holbrook. We just destroyed her in court this morning, exposed 40 years of property fraud. She's facing criminal charges. This text isn't from her phone number. Burn a phone. But who else would know I was in court today? Who else would have motive to destroy my pool specifically?" Martinez stuttered the message. "Mr. Chen, I understand you're upset, but we need proof. Not speculation. Do you have security cameras?" "They smashed them too. Any neighbors with cameras pointing this direction?" David's heart sank. "Margaret's house has cameras covering the whole street, but good luck getting that footage." Martinez made notes in her pad. "We'll request it through proper channels. In the meantime, is there somewhere safe you and your daughter can stay? If this escalates further..." "It already has escalated." Rebecca's voice came from the front door. She stepped carefully through the debris, her face grim as she surveyed the destruction. "David, we need to talk." They gathered in Mrs. Kim's living room, the only space that felt safe, while Emma played quietly with Mrs. Kim's cat. Rebecca spread legal documents across the coffee table with the air of someone delivering bad news. "I've been making calls since you phoned," Rebecca began. "The property fraud charges against Margaret are solid, the DA's office is definitely moving forward. But there's something else." "What?" "Margaret filed bankruptcy this morning. About an hour after the court hearing ended." David felt the room spin. Bankruptcy. Chapter 7. Complete liquidation. She's claiming her legal fees and the property restoration costs have left her financially ruined. Rebecca's expression was troubled. "David, if she's truly bankrupt, you'll never see compensation for this damage. Even if we prove she was responsible. So she destroys my life and just walks away." Worse than that. Rebecca pulled out another document. She's also filed for emergency protective orders against you, claiming you've been harassing and threatening her since the court hearing. That's insane. I've been here dealing with, David gestured at the window where his destroyed house was visible across the yard. How could I be harassing her when my entire life is in pieces? She's claiming the harassment happened before the break-in. Says you've been sending threatening messages, driving by her house, intimidating her in public. Rebecca's voice was carefully neutral. David, she's building a narrative where you're the dangerous neighbor and she's the victim. Emma looked up from petting the cat. Daddy, why is everyone being so mean to us? David knelt beside his daughter, struggling to find words that wouldn't terrify her further. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices when they are angry, sweetheart. But we are going to figure this out. But privately, David was beginning to understand the true scope of Margaret's revenge. She hadn't just destroyed his house, she'd destroyed his financial future, his legal standing, and potentially his relationship with his daughter if the protective orders escalated to custody issues. Detective Martinez rejoined them, shaking her head. Mr. Chen, I have some updates, and none of them are good news. Let me guess, Margaret's security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during the break-in. Actually, they show something interesting. There was a landscaping truck on the street during the time frame, but it's registered to a company that went out of business 6 months ago. The license plates were stolen from a vehicle in the next county. Rebecca leaned forward. Professional job. Very professional. Whoever organized this knew exactly how to avoid identification. They even disabled the city's traffic cameras at both ends of the street. Martinez's expression was troubled. Mr. Chen, this level of coordination suggests significant resources and planning. We are not dealing with a crime of passion here. David's phone buzzed with another text, one house down. How many more things do you love that can be destroyed? Maybe it's time to leave town before something happens to what really matters. This time, Emma was watching when he read it. She saw his face go white, saw his hands start shaking again. Daddy. What's wrong? David looked at his 8-year-old daughter, the only thing in his life that Margaret couldn't destroy, the only thing that mattered more than property or pride or justice. And he realized with crystal clarity that Margaret Holbrook knew exactly where to aim her next attack. Detective Martinez, he said quietly, I need protective custody for my daughter. Based on text messages. Based on the fact that someone just destroyed my entire life in 4 hours and now they are threatening to go after what really matters. David's voice was steel. And if anything happens to Emma, I won't be calling the police. The room fell silent. Through the window, David could see Margaret's house in the distance, all lights on despite the early evening hour. She was awake. Probably watching, probably planning her next move in a game where she'd already proven there were no rules. Rebecca gathered her papers with grim determination. David, we are past the point of legal remedies. Margaret's bankruptcy filing, the protective orders, the professional destruction of your property, she's not just trying to win anymore. She's trying to erase you completely. So what do we do? Rebecca's smile was cold as winter. We find out what Margaret Holbrook is really afraid of. Because people don't go this far to destroy someone unless they are protecting something even more valuable. As if summoned by their conversation, David's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Without thinking. Hello. Margaret's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, desperate, stripped of all its former authority. Mr. Chen. We need to talk. I think we are past talking, don't you? Please. The word came out like a sob. There are things you don't understand. Things that if they come out but won't just destroy me. David looked at Emma, safe for now but playing in a stranger's house because her home lay in ruins. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you destroyed my life. David. Please. One conversation. Just let me explain. And then if you still want to destroy me, I won't fight you anymore. The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone in confusion. Margaret Holbrook, the woman who'd terrorized neighbors for decades, who'd committed fraud for 40 years. who just orchestrated the professional destruction of his entire life, was begging for mercy. Which meant Rebecca was right, there was something even bigger that Margaret was desperate to protect. And David Chen was about to find out what it was.